they have hit this wall that they now need to somehow get over or get around. Alphabet seems to just have a different set of dynamics behind it. The fact that they over-deliver every quarter in the past year is amazing, because that's not been the trend.
Hey gang, it's Monday, February 14th. Happy Valentine's Day to everyone listening. Welcome to the Behind the Numbers Daily, an eMarketer podcast made possible by Mountain. And today I'm joined by our principal analyst who heads up our advertising and media practice. It's Paul Verna.
Great to be here as always, and happy Valentine's Day to you and to our listeners.
Thank you, sir. Thank you indeed. Today's myth: the sun is yellow. I know. So according to the and don't be thinking it's orange or red either, apparently. According to the Stanford Solar Center, it is a common misconception that the sun is yellow or orange or even red. In reality, the sun is essentially all colors mixed together, which appear to our eyes as white. The reason we see the sun as yellow or orange most of the time is because those colored wavelengths, which are longer, are the only ones that make it to our eyes. The other short wavelength colors, green, blue, and violet, become scattered by the atmosphere.
I've had this wrong the whole time, because what I do is I stare at the sun for like 10 minutes and then I don't see anything. So I don't know what color it is.
Do you... Okay, we need to talk about that later.
But never during an eclipse.
Okay, oh good. Do you remember the first time you were told that you weren't supposed to stare at the sun?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And then that's the only thing you did for like the next, probably the next 10 minutes.
And I remember closing my eyes and still seeing the imprint. And, you know, I grew up in a place where the sun was blazing and there all the time. So I had plenty of chances to...
You grew up in England too?
Yes, London, yeah.
There's no sun there. All right. That's today's myth. What we're talking
actually,
about.
Good.
Tell me.
Sorry, but how did that play out for you? Because like you were told things about the sun and you're like, the what?
Yeah, exactly. Had to learn about that later in life. Where's it been hiding? Behind the grey blanket of cloud that lives above your country, Marcus. That's where. Anyway, today's real topic. When will Google ever slow down? Never. Moving on. Paul, we're talking all about Google today, and they just won't quit, will they? They just won't quit making money. Let's talk about their revenue highlights. Oh,
yeah,
Google.
It's crazy.
Google, it doesn't make any sense. Someone needs to audit these numbers, okay? Because they're not to be believed. But this is what we've got for you. Google advertising pulled in $61 billion in Q4, yet another quarterly record. Q4 growth was up 32% versus last year's 24%. For context, with $61 billion that Google made in advertising revenue, you could buy Snapchat or Heineken. Not some Heineken or Heineken's. Heineken, the company, because it's got that market cap. It's the same market cap as what Google made in advertising revenue. Advertising revenue, Alphabet's the bigger company. We're talking about just the Google advertising revenue, of which it's about 80% of the company's revenue comes from, Alphabet's revenue comes from Google advertising. So that's top line, 61 billion. Most of that 61 billion, 71%, most of that $61 billion in Google ad dollars comes from Google search and other. That is up 36%, double last Q4's growth. So that did really well as well. So that's 71% of Google advertising for Google search. Google network makes up 15% of the total. That was up 26%. Slightly faster than last Q4, and YouTube, that makes up the remainder, 14%, so pretty much the same as Google Network, but a little bit less, and that was up 25% as well. So it makes up the same as Google Network and grew about the same size as Google Network, 25% growth, pulling in $8.6 billion, basically $9 billion for the quarter, that coming from YouTube. Paul, the revenue growth figures this quarter from Google were blank.
Big. Staggering.
Yep. How many other words? How come?
Yeah.
How come?
Tech companies and social media companies have not performed very well in the last couple of quarters. Alphabet is definitely the exception. I mean, if you look at what's been happening with Meta and Netflix, those companies have really taken a hit for different reasons, but the common denominator is that a a lot of these companies have reached a certain inflection point where their businesses have scaled to such dizzying heights that there's not that there's no more growth. And, I'm not suggesting that this is the end of the road for any of those companies, but they have hit this wall that they now need to somehow get over or get around. Alphabet seems to just have a different set of dynamics behind it. The fact that they over-deliver every quarter in the past year is amazing, because that's not been the trend.
You scratch below the surface a bit. They pointed to retail, Paul, didn't they, as one of the big drivers for these results, and also not being as affected by Apple's ad tracking transparency changes as well. And then just improvements to their services. Garrett Sloan of Ad Age noting some comments from Alphabet's Chief Business Officer, Philip Schindler, saying Google has done more to automate the ad platform so retailers could set profiles in search results, bid on keywords, and connect to YouTube campaigns. They've also invested more in AI that is helping marketers manage these campaigns.
Yeah, they're definitely not resting on their laurels there. They're trying to improve the platform, improve the experience, deliver more ROI to advertisers, and by all accounts, they seem to be succeeding by all those metrics.
Yeah, it seems to be working out. There was a Morgan Stanley survey suggesting that more people turning to Google and YouTube when they're starting shopping experience as well. That up slightly from the last time they took that survey. So according to that one survey, things are working out. According to these revenue figures, things are definitely working out. A lot of numbers, Paul, being thrown around in these financials, top line numbers, growth numbers, some profit numbers. What for you were the two most interesting revenue figures this quarter/year? Because obviously we have the full year now. Q4 has been plugged in. What were those two most interesting revenue figures for you?
The top line number and how large it is and how it grew by over 40% year over year, that definitely stands out.
And that's the full year,
yeah,
over
full
200.
year.
Yep.
Actually, it's the full year for Alphabet, but it's also that 40+% also applies to Google advertising and Google search and even YouTube. So all of those units are basically delivering massive increases, or delivered massive increases in 2021 over 2020, which was also a big year for them because it was a year when they overperformed according to what people expected at the beginning of the pandemic. So
right.
Just the size of the revenue and the growth factors, that I think is notable.
And really quickly, just on those numbers, so for people, total Alphabet revenue 2021, $257 billion, as Paul mentioned, over 40% growth. And then that Google advertising top line number, which makes up 80% of that, was 210 billion, also up over 40% full year 2021.
And the second thing that jumped out at me is something that doesn't tell as strong a story for Alphabet or for Google, and it's the fact that YouTube advertising revenue in the fourth quarter was below expectations. And, we can get into that. Well, what I make of that is that, again, YouTube, if you look at it year on year, it definitely delivered in that same 40+ percentage point growth. But I also think that YouTube is a little bit under stress from TikTok. I think it's probably an exaggeration, or at least premature, to call TikTok an existential threat. But there are a lot of ways in which it's really kind of horning in on YouTube's territory. And if you look at the fact that TikTok is now all about short viral videos, that used to be YouTube's domain. You look at the creator ecosystem, or the fact that the phrase TikTok famous is now just as much part of the vernacular as the expression YouTuber. Or you look at music discovery, which was another thing that YouTube had done very well. And even how-to videos. I think I might have talked about this in a previous episode where that was definitely YouTube's bread and butter. TikTok is encroaching on that territory now. So I think in all those ways, YouTube is kind of looking in its rearview mirror and seeing TikTok get bigger and bigger. And that we're starting to see that reflected in the numbers. And I have a feeling that if there are fault lines in Alphabet's business, that's going to be one of them.
Yes, I mean, there's two ways of looking at this, and I'm going to press you for an answer actually on this, whether you fall into Camp A or Camp B. Camp A, would suggest that there is something going on here, because the last time they were under 25% growth was Q2 of 2020. Prior to Q4, it's been 5 quarters of over 30% growth, and you had 32% in Q3 of 2020, 46% in Q4, and then the quarters of this year, it went 49, 84, and 43% growth year on year for each of the quarters in 2021, dropping to 25. And so you say, okay, it's been above 30, 40, even up to 84 at one point, and now it's down to 25. Something's going on there. Or the camp B could suggest that YouTube's full year revenue was up 45% when you take all of the 2021 quarters, up 45% versus 30 in 2020, making close to $30 billion. And Paul, that's more, $8.6 billion that YouTube made in Q4 was more than Netflix made in Q4. And it's more of an optimistic viewpoint. Camp A or Camp B?
I would say I'm in Camp A. I mean, I definitely acknowledge that there is a lumpiness and that you need to look in a longer time span than just a quarter. And if you do that, then YouTube is perfectly fine. But the reason I'm in Camp A is that there is a lot going on. Another metric where Google underperformed was in traffic acquisition costs, which actually went up quite a bit. So that means that they're spending more money to basically deliver that advertising revenue, mostly on YouTube, because that's where the majority of those traffic acquisition costs go. So I think there's something there. I'm not prepared to say that the sky is falling on YouTube. And I also think that TikTok benefits from the fact that they haven't had the kinds of issues happen to them yet that have happened to most other social media and tech companies, which is the massive PR crises and the boycotts and the regulatory scrutiny. I mean, they've had some of that, but I have a feeling that more of that is on the way for TikTok, so that the kind of rocket ride that they're on is probably going to hit some bumps at some point.
Yeah.
So, and YouTube has so much strength in the market. So I'm definitely not saying that, this is the beginning of the end by any stretch. But I do think that YouTube and Google and Alphabet executives are probably more nervous than they're letting on about what's happening in their landscape, especially with TikTok.
Yeah, no more kind of set it and forget it record growth. Google might be the exception. Talk about Amazon in a couple of days' time. But you talked about regulatory scrutiny. I want to touch on that for a second, because Trip Mickle of the Wall Street Journal, he thinks that could be Google's biggest competitor. He says the biggest peril for Google comes from regulators, saying the US and Europe are filing lawsuits proposing legislation to curtail its dominance, pointing to one example in America where Google faces separate antitrust lawsuits against its ad tech, search, and App Store businesses, and state cases over claims deceptively collected customers' location information. Google also faces proposed legislation that would limit tech companies' ability to favor their own businesses, as well as a new bill being led by Senator Mike Lee of Utah that would force it to divest its ad tech units. Would you agree, Paul, that regulators are Google's biggest competitor at this point? I
don't think so. I mean, I think definitely regulation is a big concern, especially considering that regulation at the state level can ripple into change your business practices on a national or even international level for a company or for any company. It's also very hard to handicap how this is all going to play out. But maybe it's just me being cynical. I look at all of these big tech companies as having a lot of resources, great lawyers, great lobbyists, and an ability to circumvent and persuade legislators to not go really hard on them. So I don't think that we're going to see regulation on its own take a big dent out of Google's business in the US.
Right, yeah. We just don't know the scale of the impact of these regulations. Mr. Mickle of the Journal was saying, at best, these challenges will saddle Google with legal fees and discourage acquisitions that could draw regulators' ire. According to analysts, worst, the search giant could be forced to unload some business units to comply with judicial rulings or new laws. But so far, they haven't had a significant effect on any of the tech companies, have they?
Even if it does happen in that more worst case scenario, I think Google has so many ways to insulate its business that it may take a hit for a while, but overall, it could pivot or it could focus more on certain areas of its business. So I just don't see regulation itself knocking them off their perch.
Right. I mean, it could still be a lot better off and likely would be than a lot of other companies in the same space. I want to point to two other figures, Paul. I guess one other figure, but touching on one quickly that you mentioned, Google advertising, the full year revenue up 43% versus 2020's 9%. 43% growth in Google advertising, full year 2021, 43% growth versus last year's 9%. So 4 times as high, making that $210 billion that we talked about. With that, Paul, you could buy Salesforce or you could buy Shell, and they're the 54th and 57th largest companies in the world by market cap. So just in Google advertising revenue, if they didn't have to pay anything out in terms of expenses or anything, they could just buy those two companies or one of the two. And then the final number here is net income. So they made nearly $80 billion in net income in 2021. That was nearly double, up 88%. Last year, it grew 17. So it grew from 17 in 2020 to 88% growth in full year net income this year. That's nearly enough money to buy the largest bank in France, BNP Paribas, or Target. You can nearly buy Target with that amount of money. Google's 2021 profits were more than that of Goldman Sachs and Visa combined. These numbers make no sense. I don't know what to do.
They're crazy. And it just begs the question, like, are they going to buy Shell, or are they going to buy Target, or are they going to buy BNP Paribas? I mean,
probably
stranger
Target.
things have happened.
Target's very popular in this country. People love it.
Yes, or maybe they'll be part of the Peloton fire sale. Who knows?
Right, exactly. That's all we've got time for the lead. Time now for the halftime report. Paul, I'll take a takeaway from you from the first half, and then also a letter grade for Google's overall, maybe a grade for their Q4 and also their full year performance.
The takeaway is that they're just a force to be reckoned with, and they are, their stock and their earnings are outperforming most of the other companies in their space, including huge ones like Amazon and Meta and others. So definitely a juggernaut. The letter grade for both Q4 and the full year, I'm going to say, is an A.
Has to be.
Yeah, it would have been an A plus if not for the things we talked about with YouTube, with Q4, or the traffic acquisition costs and some of the trends that we see that could be a threat. But yeah, I'd say an A.
Do better, Google. Do better. That's what we've got.
Apply yourself.
What's that?
Apply yourself.
Exactly. If you wouldn't mind. That's all we've got time for the lead story time now for In Other News. But first, a quick word from our sponsor, Mountain. The rise in connected TV viewership has given advertisers a new way to drive incremental reach and revenue, but they need the right marketing software solution to truly make the most of this opportunity. That's where Performance TV comes in. Mountain's connected TV software platform allows advertisers across every industry to drive more visits, conversions, and revenue, all from a single intuitive solution that's optimized to deliver performance. Visit mountain.com to get started today. Folks, we are back today in other news. Broadcasters continue to launch their own in-house measurement and how many CTV ads are running when TV sets are switched off. Story 1. Warner Media is joining the growing number of broadcasters launching their own in-house measurement services, this time via a partnership with Comscore, iSpot.tv, and Video Amp. Per ad week, writes Insider Intelligence analyst Daniel Konstantinovich. For context, Nielsen lost its Media Rating Council accreditation last year for its local and national ratings, prompting networks, think Warner Media, Viacom CBS, NBC Universal, to say they'd soon be launching their own first-party data ratings services. Paul, when the dust settles, the landscape of TV and video measurement options will be blank.
Fragmented. I'm not sure if the dust is going to settle at this point. I think that we are not looking at a future where there's going to be a neat industry standard the way Nielsen was So I do think that we're going to be looking at a very fragmented market in the best of cases.
Story 2. 1 in 4 CTV ads run when TV sets are turned off. Double Verify finds, notes Wayne Friedman of MediaPost. Digital media measurement and analytics service Double Verify said that this happened in 1 of 4 top environments that continue to play programming, including recording ad impressions, when the TV screen itself is in fact turned off, but a CTV device or app remains on. Mr. Friedman says, quote, that Double Verify, which tests and evaluates CTV devices and apps to ensure that ads are only displayed 100% on screen and when the TV screen is turned on, says it continues to see viewability challenges with CTV, close quote. So, Paul, CTV viewability challenges, in your opinion, are blank.
A little creepy in the sense that if all those ads are being served to no one, that's a lot of fraud. I mean, 1 out of 4, that's a lot. I mean, you could say that Double Verify is in the business of trying to police, advertising on connected TV and other platforms. So it's a little bit like the virus detection companies like selling you software, but but I'm not disparaging their figures, and they're, very reputable company with some solid data. So it's definitely a problem.
That's all we've got time for. Thank you so much, Paul, for hanging out.
Always a pleasure.
Yes, sir. And thank you to Victoria. She edits the show. Thanks to everyone listening in. We'll see you tomorrow, hopefully, for the Behind the Numbers Daily, an eMarketer podcast made possible by Mountain.